organizations that are part of the Pop University for Palestine Coalition. Thanks for coming. So I'll be speaking on Beyond and primarily what it means to be and what it means to be liberated and free. So before we start, does anybody know the definition of the ceasefire off the top of their head?
It's a temporary halt of fire between both parties in typically a war.
One of the definitions for sure.
I thought it meant just one party.
It could mean that too, and that's part of the problem with throwing out the term ceasefire, because it has very loose definitions that are applied differently by varying parties. So with that in mind, like was said, it's either a permanent or temporary a ceasing and fire, quite literally a ceasefire. It's usually comes as a result of a successful political process with both or all parties having reached an accord on all aspects of the peace negotiations. Does not necessarily need to be preceded by a preliminary ceasefire. In other cases, a definitive ceasefire, that's after it addresses broader security arrangements. In most cases, the active phase of a definitive ceasefire ends with the disarmament or demobilization of identified forces. But the follow-on security arrangements may remain in place for many years after an agreement has been signed. Definitive ceasefires are intricately linked to the political, social, and economic dimensions of the broader peace movement. So there's, like I said, there's multiple types of ceasefires, some of which are often thrown around recently, such as a humanitarian pause and the geographical and sectoral ceasefires. Humanitarian pauses being those which are made to allow aid or other humanitarian things in, or for humanitarian purposes. Sectoral ceasefire are those that prohibit the targeting of certain groups, like women or children, or infrastructure. And a whole list of ceasefires may include temporary ceasefires, unilateral ceasefires, which is what you mentioned, bilateral ceasefires, which is what Walid mentioned, and multilateral when there's two or more parties. Other types of ceasefire are informal ceasefires, things that are made as a handshake, or when warring parties say on like a public communication, we agreed to ceasefire, but nothing has been signed. Other types can be an imposed ceasefire, which that typically comes from institutions like the UN. They're very rare. You can probably count the times that's happened in one hand. And other types of ceasefire is a de facto ceasefire, when there's just no firing, active conflict being waged by either party.
Can I ask a question about the UN one?
Sure.
Has the UN ever tried to do a ceasefire for both sides with Israel?
Yeah. I mean it's been tried. That's what I was about to get into. So all of these things that I just listed, they've been employed or have been attempted to be employed in the duration of the last 7 months, and far beyond that. The ceasefire has not, the imposed ceasefire has not been allowed to pass due to U.S. vetoes.
So the U.S. is a big problem with all this. It's not just, it is Israel, but they're not the only puzzle.
Well, yeah, I'll get into some of that for sure, but the U.S. is the primary ones that are arming and funding this conflict.
Yeah.
The billions of dollars every day or every year are going to Israel to continue this genocide.
On both sides.
Well, if you want to call them left, sure, but yeah, the liberals and the Republicans,
Yeah,
it's bipartisan for sure. So as we saw, there's been ceasefire resolutions passed across the U.S. stronger than others, more conclusive, more definitive, but all have the basic premise of a ceasefire. Just the other day, we saw Hamas accepted a ceasefire deal that was brokered by Egypt and Qatar. Did anybody see the contents of that ceasefire deal? No. You raise your hand. Do you want to throw out one of the specifics of that ceasefire deal?
It was based on the time. It was, what was it?
2 hours or 15 hours?
Sort of, yeah. It did have time constraints, and when there's 3 separate stages. I'll just describe the gist of that deal, which was accepted by Hamas. I will restate, but rejected by Israel. The first stage, each stage was a 42-day stage, grateful, or I guess grateful isn't the word, but it's very it's definitely not. It's already a compromise in itself. But I'll just detail the basics of that ceasefire deal. First is a temporary cessation of hostilities, the withdrawal of Israeli forces eastward, unhindered entry of humanitarian aid, all displaced Palestinians to go home, Israeli planes and drones stop flying over Gaza for 10 hours a day. Hamas will release 33 captives, women, the sick, and male civilians aged below 19 and above 50 years old. And for each of the civilian captive release, Israel would release 30 Palestinian prisoners and 50 for each captive female soldier. And this first stage would also include reconstruction in Gaza and the construction of at least 60,000 temporary homes and 200,000 tents in Gaza. So that's the first stage. The second stage was military operations end permanently. Israel withdraws from Gaza completely. The exchange of remaining captive Israeli men and soldiers for Palestinian prisoners. And the third and final stage would be the exchange of remains of captives and prisoners held by both sides, 3 to 5 year Gaza reconstruction plan, and the siege of the Gaza Strip ends completely. So once again, Israel rejected this deal. Does anyone want to take a guess at why?
Because they just want to conquer Gaza.
Correct. Because they don't care about a ceasefire. They only care about expansion. They only care for the total control of Palestine and what it has done to Greater Israel, extending into Egypt and Iraq. I think most of us here understand this fact by now, but there was no ceasefire before October 7th. There was no peace for the Palestinian people, and there simply can't be peace while you're living under occupation. No, the word peace, I think it's a tumultuous one, despite its well-meaning intentions. It means different things to different people, just like the word ceasefire means different things to different people. I will say it to the oppressive peace is when the status quo remains as is. Drawing back to the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he said, referring to the white moderate who preferred order to justice, a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Accordingly, Kwame Ture, a leading figure of the militant Black liberation movement, said the following: there is a difference between peace and liberation, is there not? You can have injustice and have peace. You can have peace and be enslaved. So peace is not the answer. Liberation is the answer. And then he followed up by saying, that's the white man's word. That's the oppressor's word. Liberation is our word. You can't have peace until everybody is equal. So negative peace, once again, that's what the oppressor wants. The oppressor, the ruling class, wants us to be silent, still, and complacent. But we showed here with this encampment, the student movement showed across the country that we don't want that. The Palestinian people showed that they don't want that. They rose up in revolution in the face of a genocide, and for that they were demonized by the Western media. This has always been the case, and those who have taken up arms in response to having guns and bombs pointed at them to do so because it's the last recourse, that's always been the case for them. As far back as the 1936 Palestinian Revolution, and even before, the armed resistance came as a result of violent oppression. It came after petitions and pleas before the international community fell on deaf ears. Each of the major Palestinian resistance factions fighting under United Front today came to be elected after the conflict. But here we are, now in month 7 of the genocide, where the onus of the ceasefire has been imposed onto the Palestinians. The people who are being oppressed are being blamed for refusing to bow down. So all this is to say, how do we envision going beyond a ceasefire? Some folks seem to think that a ceasefire is an end-all be-all, that a ceasefire in itself will bring about the liberation of the Palestinian people. Some other people seem to think that there was a ceasefire before October 7th. But U.S.-made bombs and bullets were used against Palestinians way before October since, and that much needs to be clear. And as I've stated before, as this entire encampment has stated before, the cessation of bombs and bullets is the bare minimum that must occur before Palestine is free. But this cessation must be on the terms of the Palestinian people. The Zionist entity, Israel, the country that is actively committing a genocide, and with it the U.S., which is on the UN Security Council, should not have the authority to impose deals and veto ceasefire votes at the UN. But they do have the authority. So we need to deal with that reality. So what is left after that? What is left is for the world to take the side of the Palestinians. What is left is for us to simply understand international law and And if you understand international law, you will see that the Palestinians have every right to rise up, while the Israeli occupiers have no right to be on stolen land and no right to so-called self-defense. Once again, peace cannot be achieved without liberation, and the United Nations themselves, in United Nations Charter 45-130, stated, the right of peoples to self-determination and struggle by all available means makes the following declarations. This is just a paraphrase of what's in the United Nations Charter 45-130. The United Nations themselves acknowledges that the right to self-defense of an occupied people. So I'll just list a couple of things within that charter. One, this charter reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggles of people for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial domination, apartheid, and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. It also reaffirms the inalienable right of the Namibian people. This was written in the time of apartheid. This was written in the time of the Black Liberation Movement in Southern Africa, and Africa as a whole. So that's the context of this document. So it reaffirms the inalienable right of the Namibian people. Also, this leads the Palestinian people and all peoples under foreign occupation and colonial domination to self-determination, national independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and sovereignty without foreign interference. It strongly condemns those governments that do not recognize the right to self-determination and independence of all peoples still under colonial domination, alien subjugation, and foreign occupation. Notably, the peoples of Africa and the Palestinian people. These are not my words, these are the words of the UN. It also calls upon Israel to refrain from deporting any Palestinian civilians from the occupied Palestinian territories and to release immediately all Palestinian detainees. So these demands, they are more than 50 years in the making, right? So it continues. It strongly condemns the constant and deliberate violations of the fundamental rights of the Palestinian people, as well as the expansionist activities of Israel in the Middle East, which constitute an obstacle of the achievement to self-determination and independence by the Palestinian people, and a threat to peace and stability in the region. It strongly condemns the policy of those Western states, Israel and other states whose political, economic, military, nuclear, strategic, and cultural and sports relations with the racist minority regime of South Africa encourage that regime to persist in the suppression of the aspirations of the people to self-determination and independence. It denounces the collusion between Israel and South Africa and expresses the support of the declaration of the International Conference on the Alliance between South Africa and Israel. And it strongly reaffirms its solidarity with the independent African countries and national liberation movements that are the victims of murderous acts of aggression and destabilization by the racist regime of Pretoria, that being South Africa, and calls upon the international community to render increased assistance and support to these countries in order to enable them to strengthen their defense capacity, defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity, and peacefully rebuild the sovereignty. So having read all that, having read that the UN themselves reaffirms the right for the Palestinian people to take up arms in self-defense to their occupiers, and taken in the context of the last 7 months in which the Palestinian people have been demonized for doing exactly that, what does that make people think? Yeah, so taking in this document from the UN that was written 40 years ago, 40 to 50 years ago, and then in context of the last 7 months where the Palestinian people were criminalized and demonized for doing exactly this, what does that make you think?
Well, it's the whole order over justice thing. Anyone who uprises or resists essentially violence.
I think that it tells us that the occupation of Gaza is illegal by international standards. Even the international community is saying it, but the media wants us to believe otherwise because they get money off of Israel.
And the criminalization of resistance thank you.
You just talk.
The criminalization of resistance and going against the status quo is a very heavily used tactic in the act of apartheid and imperialism. If you don't enact that negative piece that we talked about, you will be demonized in the media. You will be misinterpreted by everyone who watches the media and read it concept of peace, but in the negative sense, like you mentioned.
Yeah. So, in short, it's hypocrisy, right? It's hypocrisy for the UN themselves to write this while the international community condemns the Palestinians for exercising their rights under international law, while refusing to condemn and do anything worth of substance against the Israeli occupation forces, which are actively breaching international law and have been since its inception. So all that to say, what comes after a ceasefire? What is beyond a ceasefire that I've asked everybody to ponder? Going beyond a ceasefire is liberation, decolonization, revolution. That is what's next, and that is what we are in the process of witnessing. With that, in page 53 of Self-Defense, A Philosophy of Violence, a book written by Elsa Dorland, there is a poem from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising called Going Down Fighting. People know what the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was, yes? Or you can take a good guess what it was. There was an uprising during the Nazi occupation, during the Nazi genocide, the Nazi Holocaust in the Warsaw Ghetto, which is one of the largest ghettos of primarily Jewish people. This poem goes like this, and I hope that I can read it and it's received well. But in any way, it says, the occupier proceeds to the second phase of your extermination. Don't go blindly to your death. Defend yourself. Pick up an axe, a crowbar, a knife, and barricade your home. Don't just let yourself be captured. By fighting, you stand a chance at survival. Resist. And these are words from people that I've seen their occupier in the face, that I looked their occupier in the face, that I looked their oppressor in the face and resist. Coming from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, if that's not enough to convince you that a people, when they're occupied, when the people are oppressed, they have every right to rise up, every right to self-defense. I don't know what will. But to follow, with some more words of revolutionary past, Huey P. Newton of the Black Panther Party said that even the peace movement doesn't compromise our defense principle. He followed up by saying the racist dog policemen must withdraw from our communities and cease their wanton murder, brutality, and torture of black people or face the wrath of the armed people. This was a real reality, that a real demand, a very sensible demand. Please stop, murdering and brutalizing and torturing our people en masse, or we'll be forced to defend ourselves. And that's what's true of oppressed people around the world. That's what's been the truth since humanity became a thing. When you oppress a people, when you violently repress a people specifically, they will rise up, and that's what's natural. A couple days ago we had a presentation on it's human nature, and one of the things that is also human nature is to resist. One of the things that is also human nature is to resist oppression. Anybody that's been in a situation of oppression can, attest to that fact. Resisting that oppression comes as natural as breathing, as sleeping, as eating. It's human nature to resist. To wrap up, what I'm trying to say here is that, Walter Rodney, he was a Trinidadian revolutionary who was assassinated alongside his niece in a car bomb. Anybody know of Walter Rodney? Well, in any sense, in a book called Grounding with My Brothers, he said, we were told that violence in itself is evil, and that wherever the cause, it is unjustified morally. But by what standard of morality can the violence used by a slave to break his chains be considered the same as the violence of a slave master? By what standard can we equate the violence of blacks who have been oppressed, suppressed, oppressed, and repressed for 4 centuries with the violence of white fascists? Violence aimed at the recovery of human dignity and equality cannot be judged by the same yardstick as violence aimed at maintenance of discrimination and oppression. So as we think of oppression, as we think of reactions to that oppression, I think we all need to understand that resistance is as a natural a thing as breathing, sleeping when you're oppressed. It is natural. It is necessary. You can't tie any animal up. You can't tie any animal up and expect it to not want to break loose. So when we think of what comes beyond the ceasefire, the ceasefire is the bare minimum. The cessation of bombs, the cessation of bullets, that's the bare minimum. What comes after that is what we want. What comes after that is liberation. What comes after that is decolonization. And what decolonization looks like, that's up to the Palestinian people. It should be on their terms and no one else's terms. So, as we sit here on Palestine, as we sit here, getting told that there's a ceasefire here, that there's a ceasefire there, let's recognize the reality that that's a half step to decolonization, a half step to liberation. And beyond that fact, Israel has continuously broken those ceasefires and rejected them, as we saw a few days ago. So when they reject the most basic of ceasefire deals, when they rejected these ceasefire deals for decades and inflicted the most harrowing types of violence and repression that humanity has ever witnessed, what is left? What is left? What are we going to ask the Palestinian people to do? Are we going to ask them to lie down? Then exactly, we're not going to ask them to lie down. We're not going to ask them to bow down. What comes after that is solely up to the Palestinian people, and it's on us as students in the U.S.
I would ask them to rise up.
It's on us to pressure our government to cease all aid to Israel, and it's also on us to stand with the Palestinian resistance. So that's the message I want to leave with y'all today. Stand with the Palestinian resistance, stand with the Palestinian people. And for those that haven't seen, those messages across the U.S., coming from Palestine, is that you can't stand in solidarity with our corpses and not stand in solidarity with our resistance, right? So if we're gonna stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, it must be by all means, it must be unconditional, right? Solidarity is not conditional. We need to emphasize that here. If it hasn't been emphasized yet, I'll emphasize it here. We stand with the Palestinian resistance. We stand with Palestine and all resistance forces in Palestine. So, thanks for listening. I'm here to take any questions now or later. But yeah, thank you.
So I sent you the news about the U.S. stopping the aid to Israel temporarily, like pausing it. Do you think the protests are the reason because of that? Do you think standing in solidarity with Palestine has worked so far?
Yeah, I think we've effected change. However minor it may be, it is a temporary cessation in these bombs and bullets. However, we shouldn't. We should recognize that they already have enough bombs and bullets that we've sent before. So any temporary cessation is, it's just platitudes. We need concrete action, not just temporary cessations. But it is a step.
Do you think Israel is going to actually attack Iran like they threatened if America doesn't send them the weapons, or do you think it's all bark, no bite?
I think that's left to be seen. I think an expansion, regional war is not in the best interest of Israel, not in the best interest of the U.S.
Sorry. So, the U.S., a singular nation state, has the ability to veto a vote made by a council of multiple nations.
Without our weapons, of
US,
course.
not the U.S.
They're always gonna get weapons by some other country. They got what?
At the end of
Or
the
not
day,
weapons
it's
from where, but they're gonna find weapons.
and therefore it's
But they don't have the capacity. Just a little parallel to take them. Oh no, they would have to go
Yeah, I
take
think
Gaza
there's a
first.
couple countries that have
But I don't
actual
think
power,
there's any.
but none of them
I don't think any
exercise
other
it
Middle Eastern
in such a
country
way that the
allow
U.S.
us
does.
to go take Iran.
And I think the UN in itself was started as a U.S. project. I think from its inception, it is a U.S. project. From its inception, U.S. has had this type of veto power, and essentially what the U.S. says, the UN follows. So it is an imperial tool. However, it is one of the few international mechanisms that that we can use widely. But one thing I neglected to mention is that neither Israel or the U.S. are parties to the International Criminal Court. So I think that's a major contradiction that we need to reckon with. As all these countries are suing Israel, are suing other countries that are allies of Israel, aiding in this genocide. They're not parties to the International Criminal Court. So what's left? I think justice in that sense will only be served by the Palestinian people. There's a question back there.
When you say negative peace, like what exactly do you mean? Like how do you identify negative?
Yeah, I'll go back a bit. Negative peace was actually a term that was coined by MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. Negative peace, is what he says is the absence of tension, whereas a positive peace is the presence of justice. And I juxtapose MLK's quote, someone who's seen as solely someone who a peace lover, but he was a peace lover, of course, but he also lover of liberation. Juxtaposing that with Kwame Ture, who was a militant black liberation leader, he said there is a difference between peace and liberation. You can have injustice and have peace. You can have peace and be enslaved. So peace isn't the answer. Liberation is the answer. You can't have peace until everybody is equal. So that's what's meant by negative peace. Peace is negative peace is the absence of tension. Negative peace is when the status quo remains as is. And that's what we don't want. That's what the Palestinian people don't want. I think that's that's more or less irrelevant. I think what I think of liberation, that's what following the guide of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian resistance. What it looks like to them is what it would look like to the vast majority of colonized peoples. Something I wish I had time to talk about in more depth is Frantz Fanon. Have you heard of Frantz Fanon? Yeah, Wretched of the Earth. He speaks extensively of what decolonization looks like. And I think we're in the process of witnessing that, and I think that means reclaiming all aspects of our culture, that have been erased. I think what that could look like is, Palestine being free from the river to the sea, and by that, it's not just rhetoric, it's not just a slogan. Decolonization means all settler colonial norms, all forms of Western influence and imperialism being removed from occupied Palestine, so that Palestine is no longer occupied.
I think that because we don't as Americans, because there's so much I guess what I'm saying is that I don't know, I'm just wondering what you think the world outside of how our
Yeah, I think I'll try to answer that to the best of my ability. I think self-determination, the principles of self-determination are written in the international law. Self-determination, that being for a nation, they get to decide what makes sense for them. Right? And I think within the U.S. we have multiple colonized nations, multiple oppressed peoples, both within the U.S. Within our contiguous border control, such as the so-called U.S. Virgin Islands, such as American Samoa, all these different nations. Decolonization to be materialized must be in charge of their own futures, must be in charge of their present. Not the U.S., not any other foreign country. In the case of Palestine, not Israel, not the U.S. I think going back to the African liberation movement, we saw attempts at decolonization which were thwarted by U.S. intervention primarily, by French intervention, of course, British intervention. These attempts at decolonization, such as Burkina Faso. You guys know Burkina Faso?
Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara and all that.
It was called Upper Volta for independence. And Thomas Sankara, along with other, Burkinese revolutionaries, they changed the name of Upper Volta to Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso means the land of upright people. So I think things like that, changing the names of, the places that have been colonized. I think, in Wisconsin, in the Midwest, we see all these contortions of indigenous names. And, one way that we'll see decolonization happen is, these places will be named after the people who should be in control of these lands, whose lands we are occupying. I think that's one of the many ways. Not only will the names be changed, but the norms will be changed. So yeah, self-determination, that's what it means. The people are in charge of their future.
have the right to self-defense. The UN mentions this. It's on all human rights, writings to ever exist. But every time we see a violent struggle or some type of armed struggle from the oppressed people's end, people say that this is terrorism. The groups are listed as terrorist groups. I can name groups now, but we all know who they are. What does rightful, lawful armed struggle, or just the struggle for liberation, really look like in the eyes of international law?
Well, it says it right here. International law says by all available means, whether that be rocks and sticks or AKs and homemade missiles. All available means all available means.
So you guys probably heard about the ICJ arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu. My question is, with all these countries withholding aid from Israel and Netanyahu getting arrested, one, do you think it'll lead to an actual arrest? Do you think they'll do anything about this? And two, if they do you think it will make the liberation of the Palestinian people easier and more attainable?
Well, I think it'd be hard for that to be attained because, like I said, Israel and the U.S. are not parties to the International Criminal Court. The U.S. has already threatened if any U.S. officials or their allies were to be arrested and attempted to be tried through the Hague, that they would invade. There's a literal Hague Invasion Act written in U.S. law. So I think there's a lot of things that need to happen before that to be the case.
Do you think those laws could be changed within the U.S. at all?
I think we can. I think we can make an effort, but ultimately, justice will only be served by those that are currently being oppressed, and whatever that looks like, that's up to those people.
Well, yeah, of course, but I just want to make it easier for them to be able to enact that justice.
Yeah, it's, we need to do everything in our power to overturn these laws. Like the anti-BDS law that's in Wisconsin and
the anti-Semitism awareness act that just passed Congress and all that.
Yeah, phrases like "from the river to the sea" and things like that are being criminalized. So I think every arena of struggle must be assessed, but ultimately it's the Palestinian people in Palestine that will feed themselves.
My question is, after Palestine is, what happened to all of the people who don't eventually with the government?
I think the Palestinian people have made that clear. Anybody that wants to live in a singular state, a state where everybody is equal, is free to stay. We saw in other cases such as Rhodesia. Rhodesia is now Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe got their independence. I think it was April 18th. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, and anybody that was there to abide by the rules of Zimbabwe, that being everybody's equal. One group of people is not superior to another group of people. This has been made clear by the Palestinians. This has been made clear by the Palestinian resistance. They're not there to impose a rule over certain sectors of people, unlike the Israeli occupation forces. They're there to a unified Palestine state means a state meant for everybody, and anybody that wants to abide by that is free to stay, and they said that themselves. The majority of those settlers have dual citizenship, so they have other places to go, whereas the Palestinian people don't. Any other questions? Comments?
First Amendment, my ass.
My concern is, if there's a revolution based on Israel, what would be the counter-revolution on the Israel people? What would happen to the Israel people? Because if we're taking the land back, because it's rightfully owned, would there be a counter-revolution based on the other side? There would have to be, what would be the end goal? What would be the solution? And I know you probably don't have the answer right now because there could be many different options. But what would you think?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I don't have a crystal ball, but partly drawing back from that answer I just gave, this fella here, decolonization, a unified Palestine state. Anybody that wants to abide by the norms of a unified Palestine state in which everybody is equal is free to stay. If there's anybody that wants to counter that, that wants to counter, a state in which everybody is equal, I think we've seen counter-revolutions happen in the past. We saw a counter-revolution happen in Chile, in which the government of Salvador Allende was overthrown. And then on another one, counter-revolution in Venezuela in 2002, which, 2002 U.S.-led coup. The Venezuelan people, were able to overthrow that counter-revolution. So it can go either way, and ultimately, I think the passionate people are poised to not only succeed in the revolution, but maintain it.
Yeah, but there's so much propaganda based on the Israel people. What would be the because you hear the news sources, you can talk to Israelis, most of them, and they're more supportive of Israel than Palestine, but you can see what's going on in Gaza. They've been living through this. You can probably walk from in Jerusalem and see the walls that are separating people. What would be the thing to change the minds of those people?
I think a lot. I think once those walls come down, they will also come down. Those mental walls will also come down. We saw on October 7th when the apartheid wall was broken down. People across the world realized, oh wow, these people were living in a concentration camp.
Yeah.
I think the literal walls will come down and the figurative ones will come down as well. And ultimately, once people see, the reality, they have no other choice but to, abide by the truth.
Okay.
I think it'll be easier to unbrainwash the young Israelis.
Yeah.
The younger you are, the easier it is to make them understand.
Okay.
Any other questions? Cool. Well, thanks for sticking around and asking questions and participating.